Welcome to the TBC podcast, where we discuss curious, thought-provoking, and sometimes controversial ideas through the lens of biblical wisdom. I'm your host, Keith Wood. Today our guest is Coach John Jones. Coach Jones, thanks so much for being here today.
It's good to be with you, Keith.
So Coach Jones is TBC's athletic director. He's got decades of college coaching experience, and he also has a MA degree in counseling and human relations. So our topic today is going to be discussing the marriage of Christian values with athletics. And so I think Coach Jones is the perfect person to be here to have that conversation with. I'm glad that you're here. A little background story from me. I used to work in a Christian financial institution. It was a Christian credit union. And I met the founder of the organization one day, and he said, "Do you know what the difference is between a Christian credit union and a secular credit union?" He said, "At a Christian credit union, we'll pray with you before we repossess your car." So when you think about Christian athletics, a Christian athletic program, is that just a program where you pray before you go out on the court, or is there more to it than that?
There's a lot more to it than that, but that's an interesting analogy and certainly some humor in that. We pray with you before we try to beat your brains out, I
Right.
guess. No, certainly I would say that the elements that underlie, a Christian, an explicitly Christian athletic program, or a program that's executed in a Christian context, whether it's at a school setting or a church setting or whatever, is one that's going to really be foundation on the values of what Christ stood for, and certainly in our case here, we're striving to inculcate values that cultivate virtue, that pursue excellence in what we strive to do, and certainly that hopefully are centered around who Christ is, and we're striving to achieve unity, through a brotherhood and a sisterhood of our relationship with Christ. And that doesn't mean every participant in the program knows Christ or has that personal relationship, but certainly we're striving to keep Christ at the center of what we do, so that ultimately we're competing for His glory and striving to make His name known through the competition.
Yeah, so some of those things I think would be in common with any sports organization. You want your team to have unity, certainly. They call it chemistry a lot of times in sports. But it sounds like in the case of a Christian organization, it's not just unity for the sake of maybe the success of the team or something like that, that there's more kind of undergirding those values and those principles that you have. Is that a fair description?
It is fair, and it's true that athletics in general, rightly executed, can produce results that, whether there's a faith-based component or not, can create value for the participants, for the fans, for everybody involved, and so that is true, because those are universal ideas for sure. But certainly in a Christian or faith-based setting, we are acknowledging the foundational roots of where those things come from, and trying to point back to that. And so we believe that there's a long and historic philosophical, almost a theology of sport that can be derived from, studying Scripture and understanding where the church fathers kind of stood on things. And, they were, Christianity was born at a time when, athletics and sports were certainly part of the culture, not always in a good way, but certainly it was there, and certainly that's something that was referenced by Paul himself throughout Scripture, used as an analogy and metaphor to teach, theological principles. So, right from the very beginning of our faith tradition, we believe that the values that underline and create value for our participants, derives straight from Scripture and straight from the Bible.
Yeah. So there's definitely overlap with secular organizations. But are there any ways that you see Christian athletic programs as being particularly countercultural?
Well, certainly, because in our modern day culture, it's all about you know uh, the glory or the pursuit of championships, and
Hmm.
the individual. Certainly there's team glory as well, but also individual glory, and money and fame and fortune and all the things that go along with that. Uh, Certainly, it's something that can unite communities as fans get involved and cheer on their teams, and there's nothing wrong with those things. But certainly in our culture today, we can become overly consumed, uh, by much of that, and I would say that Christianity, a Christian athletic program, or having Christ involved, would redirect, where that glory should be placed,
Hmm.
and we're trying to, there's a phrase, and it's almost become ubiquitous and overused, especially in Christian context, but a phrase that became popular 20, 30 years ago that says playing for an audience of one. Okay.
Hmm.
And it's a wonderful thought, and it showed up on everybody's t-shirts, when it became a popular thing, for a while. But it is true, though. I mean, that ultimately, and it's particularly in a Christian context setting, that we want to be uh, pursuing graciousness and humility in how we compete, and while we strive for excellence, ultimately it's not about us. It's about bringing glory to our Creator and the
Hmm.
one who blessed us with those gifts and abilities in which we can compete.
Would it be fair to characterize this distinction as whereas a secular program might view the athletics as an ends in and of themselves, a Christian program is going to see the athletics as a means to a different end? Do you think that's a fair characterization, or?
I think so. Yeah, it's a fair characterization, and so and that is ultimately what would I would believe provide the distinction, between
Mhm.
it's about what are you really playing for, and what are the ends that you're trying to achieve. Yeah.
Okay, good. So if we get into the actual day to day, trying to foster this program and these athletes, do you see a tension between competitive drive and Christian character? And if so, how have you seen that show up, and how have you handled it as a coach?
So I think competitive drive is something that God is straight from the very beginning, something that God instills in us and has blessed us with.
Hmm.
I think creation itself is competitive.
In what
Uh,
sense?
well, I mean, you think about it. I mean, God created. Part of the idea of having the creative ability, which human beings are the only you know beings on earth that have the ability to really create, in the sense of sure, every animals have the ability to build a nest. A bird can build a nest. A spider can create a spider web, but that's in their nature,
Hmm.
and it's for their survival. Okay, but human beings uniquely have the ability to create with a sense of beauty and a sense of trying to be uh, creative and improve what was done before. So when you see a spider web, you'll see the same spider web over and over and over again.
Hmm.
It might be vary in size or whatever else. Or the nest. Each season, when the bird comes and creates their nest, it's the same nest, every year. There's
Yeah.
no necessarily improvement on it. But as human beings, we were gifted with the ability to actually improve. To, when the wheel was invented, and one day created a better wheel and made it. So and that's derived, I think, from a competitive spirit. It's a desire to try to not just be satisfied with something where it's at, but try to actually improve it.
Hmm.
So you're competing against the prior, iteration of a thing, or whatever it is that you've created, or maybe when they first developed art back in the day, whoever you know did the first cave paintings on the wall, and maybe they were just stick figures, but then somebody else came along and said, hey, we can work with shadow and light here and create some depth here, and then somebody else.
Hmm.
So that's a form of competition. Actually, you're competing against the prior result to try to improve something. Then there's also competition as we know it today, in a sport or in a game where you're trying to achieve a better score than the opponent. But competition underlies everything in our society, and really is this the seed of improvement. Capitalism and the economy, and all of that. So I think God put that in place at the very beginning. He is a creative God, a God who creates, and He creates beauty, truth, and goodness, and has instilled human beings uniquely with that same ability. We are created in His image,
Right.
uniquely, to be able to do those things. And so I think competition is
It's an outworking of that God-given creative capacity.
exactly, yes.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, when used correctly, it can bring great benefit, to mankind. It can bring great joy in how we play our games, but there's no question it can be abused as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's, man has a unique ability to mess things up, and which is also right from the beginning. We didn't last much longer past the 7 days, and
That's
sin
true.
came into the world,
And definitely some competition there in Cain and Abel's situation.
exactly,
Right?
exactly, and that's an excellent example you bring up of a different form of competition where it's an example of competition that went wrong, and so yes, I think competition ultimately was meant for good. It was given to us. We have the capacity as humans to compete, and can be used for good and for the advancement of mankind, and has been demonstrably so, but there's no question it can be abused and used in a wrong way as well.
Are you able to identify kind of the kernel of that abuse when you see it in a player? What are some things that you're looking at and saying, you know what, I think this spirit of competition is getting maybe misordered in this player's life, and how might you address something like that?
Well, we talk, Aquinas and Augustine, many of those early church fathers talk a lot about the idea of rightly ordered loves. What you love ultimately, top is really going to determine and dictate, how your life proceeds, or what drives you or motivates you, and we talk about, understanding this idea of what is the highest good, what is the sunum bonum, the ultimate, which should be to love God first and foremost, and to honor Him and to glorify Him, with our lives. And if that happens, then everything else falls into place in its proper order, and that's when competition can be a good thing. But when self comes onto the throne, as it often does, and then it becomes about, and this is also the thing that destroys teams. When you're talking about team sports, where it's so important to prioritize, and for the team's goals over any particular individual, and that everybody has to learn to accept their role for the common good, so that the team can be elevated. Well, when somebody gets decides to prioritize their own goals, their own agenda, that kind of thing, then that's when competition can certainly become unhealthy. It also certainly can become disrespectful, and especially when it comes to a game, playing a game, to the opponent, to the game itself.
Mm-hmm.
When it's just about me and I'm going to win at all costs, even if it means breaking the rules. We certainly see that even in society.
Right.
You know,
And it also becomes counterproductive too, right? You've got a star player who wants to do it all by themselves, and really that's just not going to work, right? There has to be a recognition that you have to cooperate with other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which is one of the great, beautiful aspects of sport, especially team sport, is that done right, when everybody learns to accept their role. I mean, that's just, it's a thing that can teach, especially young people, can teach teamwork, can teach those important values of, getting self off the throne and learning to work well with others towards a common goal, and achieving that, and learning to compete well together and have that team chemistry. But yes, anybody that is not a part of that agenda and is looking to try to get on their own agenda, that is a cancer that will destroy the team in no time.
In your experience as a coach and, being around so many different teams, how common is that issue? Is it something that shows up from time to time, or is this like you have to be vigilant for this to?
You have to be vigilant.
Okay.
So I tell young coaches, this is the thing that will, this is the job. The job is to, I feel like defining roles for the players on your team, especially in team sports, is probably the toughest part of the job. People, it's not about X's and O's. It's about, there's a famous quote, it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmies and the Joes. And so it's not just about, your strategy and all that, as important as all that is. It's about the people involved. And can you get those people on the same page working together? And that's what, really we're striving to do. And as a coach, being able to define that role and then being able to get that individual to not only understand the role, but to accept it and to want to achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big difference there.
Yeah.
There are players that will, they'll accept it grudgingly.
I'll do it, but I'm not happy about
Right,
it. Right,
exactly. That's you can get by with that, but ultimately the teams that really reach their potential as a team are the ones that achieve this idea where the players not just accept the role, but really relish it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is what coach wants me to do. Man, I'm going to be excellent at doing that to the best of my ability. Even though, I want to play more, he wants me to be a reserve, or he wants me to do this, play this position, and I'd rather play that position. But you know what? For this team to help us win and whatever, I'm going to go all in and get that done. If you can get a team completely on board with that, the sky's the limit.
Definitely, it sounds like the ability to instill some vision for what could be in these players is probably closely related to that, right?
Absolutely. And that's the essence of coaching,
Mm-hmm.
is selling your vision, helping them to understand that, helping them to understand how everybody, rising tide lifts all boats, and this is the way we get the tide to rise. And not everybody's going to be the big battleship. Some players are going to be, in the smaller boat or whatever else, and relatively speaking in terms of their role. But ultimately, everybody succeeds and everybody wins if we can learn to get on that same page.
And what an important lesson broadly in life, right? I can think about the church, or you could think about really any kind of organization. I think if people could look at their role in these different organizations that way, what a tremendous difference that would make.
This is why I think athletics in a educational setting is critical. There's a lot of controversy on that. There are people that believe that, athletics has no part, I think athletics has the ability to teach in a way that no books or classroom can, and I know that's a little bit maybe controversial for some, to make that statement, but there are things that can be taught through athletic competition and participation in teams that you just can't learn, in a classroom or from a textbook or whatever else. And I've always felt strongly that athletics should be viewed not as extracurricular in an educational context, but as co-curricular.
Mm-hmm.
It should be viewed as part of the educational
formation
and the formation of our students. Absolutely.
So imagine that there's maybe a coach or someone who works at another institution who's listening to this right now, and they think, we'd like to develop some athletics. What kind of advice would you give to maybe a new coach who wants to build an athletic program on biblical principles?
Well, I think you have to make sure you're grounding it in core values. You need to identify your 3 or 4 core values that are going to be foundational to what you're about, and that are going to drive, everything that you do, and make sure that you stay rooted in those values. For us, we're trying to cultivate virtue. We think athletics is a powerful tool to achieve that when rightly, executed.
Mm-hmm.
That we can teach those values of hard work, teamwork, learning to be on time, learning to push past pain, because you experience physical pain when you're competing.
Yep.
Learning to discipline the body, and these are things values that and character traits that can help young people succeed in life, no matter what they do, even once athletics is finally over. If they've learned to cultivate these virtues within their lives, we feel it can set them up for ultimately greater success in life. And then I think certainly, the character values and unity, having a culture of unity is really important, and then ultimately trying to be Christ-centered in all that you do. So spiritual formation. It's not just about winning. It's a platform in our view, it's a platform for communicating, who Christ is,
Mm-hmm.
and why he, created us in the ways that he did with the talents that he gave us, and how then we can use those talents to reflect glory back to him, and ultimately, hopefully, to reach others through that as well.
Yeah. It sounds like, obviously a big part of that is identifying the core values and then remembering them, coming up with ways to keep them at the front, right? In
Absolutely.
everything that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what's a common mistake, if you can think of one off the top of your head? What's a common mistake that you see Christian coaches or programs making, and how would you advise them differently?
Well, I think onboarding and training is really important. So for us here, we've moved from a model where we had full-time head coaches to now we have mostly part-time head coaches, and that's been challenging. And as we've moved to that model, we've realized that how do we, the big challenge for us is how do we keep our core values at the forefront of what we're trying to achieve here, and especially dealing with coaches that have jobs and families and other things going on, and they're only here a limited amount of time, So Jeremiah Stanley was the dean of students here for a long time, and he and I had a very close relationship, worked very closely together for years. And we did a book study. We did many book studies, but there was one that we read one time called The Culture Code. And there's a term in there that the author referenced called, well, he basically set it up this way. He said, organizations have a CEO, and they have the chief executive officer.
Mm-hmm.
They have a CFO, the chief financial officer. He said, as a leader within your organization, you need to be the CRO, the chief reminding officer.
Okay.
And Jeremiah and I both, I remember we talked when we were reading through that chapter, man, that is so great. And I've tried to embody that ever since. And I even remind my staff all the time of that. Hey, it's my job to constantly put you in remembrance of what's important, why we're here, what's driving us, what our core values are, what our mission is. And I'm the chief reminding officer, and I have to keep that at the forefront. I have to remind myself of that, that's my responsibility to be steady and consistent with that. And so I try to instill that into our coaches as well, to their teams. Once you start your season and you have your core values and what you want to be about as a team, it's your job to be working with your core leaders within your team, your secondary leaders, your team captains and seniors, and players of influence within your program, to make sure you're instilling those things and reminding them what's important so that they can lead well within the locker room, but also to the broader team as well, that you have to constantly be hammering away every day about what's important and why we're here and why we're competing, and keep those main things the main thing.
One of my favorite Bible verses is Romans 12:2. It talks about, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that sounds like that's a lot of what you're talking about right now. Is you have to be renewing your mind on things that are true, on things that are right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where transformation happens, is what the Bible says. When I was younger, I used to think like, man, why do I have to go to church again this week? I've already heard all the stories. I've already heard all the lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I became older, started to realize like, man, I'm not, going to be transformed by hearing these things one time and not thinking about them again. You have to put them in front of yourself constantly.
Absolutely. And that's the way, hopefully we grow in our faith. And even when we have setbacks in our faith or life's challenges present, we have to be reminded. I mean, I think there's a verse in Peter as well that talks about that I put you in remembrance. So it's this idea that we're constantly being reminded of who we are in Christ, and we can draw strength from that. And that needs to be the case as well. And so when going back to the question, what mistakes do athletic leaders commonly make? It's drifting from that. It's getting caught up in the minutia of, and I get it. Practice planning takes time, game planning takes time, watching video takes time, disciplinary issues take time. But you have to carve out. In every single one of my practice plans when I was coaching, I started every single day, and at the very top of my practice plan was a thought for the day, a devotional time for prayer, before we did anything else. And I made sure I prioritized that every day. And so you just have to make time to do those things.
Yeah, that's great. Shifting gears a little bit, I would imagine that as a coach, you've dealt with a lot of different types of parents, both dream parents and nightmare parents. I'm curious, what does a dream parent look like to one of your athletes, and how could a parent listening to this be the kind of parent that you would want to deal with?
Well, I'm not going to mention any names.
That's fine.
Well, I won't mind mentioning the names of some of the dream parents.
Yeah,
but of course,
right.
I'll leave the nightmare parents out of this discussion. But no, I really am thankful for this. I've had 99% dream parents. And I know it's not always the case, but I've been very blessed in my career. And I think it also is a little bit different from the college level to the high school level. I've only coached 2 years very, very early in my career at the high school level. And that was just as an assistant coach. But I do remember the parent issues being a little bit more pronounced at that level. So I'm sensitive to that. And any high school coaches that are listening to this, I get that. Parents are driven by, hey, they want to get their kid playing time. They want to see their kid hopefully get in our day and age, it's all about, I want my kid to go to college and get a scholarship or get an opportunity, and coach is holding them back, and that kind of thing. So I think at the lower levels, it's difficult. There's been problems in youth sports with out of control parents who are showing up and they're just, unfortunately, don't know how to behave in a way that is supportive of not only their child, but the team and the coach, and will just become overly critical, especially at the youth sport level. At that level, it should be about developing a love for playing the game, more so than just about winning or losing or whatever. And so hopefully if coaches at that level are, yes, you want to develop skills and all that, but you also want to develop a love for winning. And, parents need to be supportive of that. But, I think part of the reason I've had mostly good parent relations is I've been very upfront and direct from the very beginning. When a student athlete comes into my program, that I'm crystal clear with the parent about what the expectations are for them as well. And I tell our parents, look, I want to be a partner with you in the holistic development of your child, and I will talk to you about anything related to their spiritual development, their character development, their academic development, their emotional development, physically, all those issues. Here's my cell phone number, call or text, all that. But the one boundary that is off limits is playing time. And I just make that clear up front. And I ask them to respect that. And I give them a path. If you're frustrated about playing time, I would ask you to talk to your child and have them come see me, man to man, or if you're coaching female, woman to coach, whatever it is, and teach your child to learn to handle themselves in that way. Now I know I'm coaching young adults, and so you turn 18, and that's a good thing for them to be learning at that age. So at the younger levels, that might be a little bit more difficult for young people, and I get that. But I think it's still critical for coaches to, lay down the expectation to parents. Unfortunately, also, there's a lot of politics that get involved at the lower levels, high school level. You have parents that are on booster clubs that donate a lot of money, and
I see.
They'll go pressure the AD behind the coach's back. I'm giving a lot of money, and I expect my kid to play.
So don't do that if you want to be a dream parent.
Right. Don't do that. That's not healthy. It's not healthy for your child either. You want to teach your child to learn to compete and earn a spot. And while there is a role, if you feel like your child is being treated unfairly, don't make a public case of it at the competition or at the game or from the stands. It's just not the appropriate time or place to do that. Rather, make an appointment with the coach, talk to them privately, express the issues, and be willing to hear the coach's perspective as well. And hopefully, if the coach is in it for the right reasons, I mean, there's no question there are bad coaches in our business, and there are transactional coaches that are just, they just want it to be about winning, and they're trying to get the next job. And if your kid's not helping them win, well, that's a bad coach. They might be successful in certain ways, wins and losses, but if they're not in the process of trying to pursue excellence in competition, also pursuing excellence in developing young people in all the other ways outside of the sport as well, then they shouldn't be in coaching, So, but parents, yes, a good parent is respectful and learns to communicate in appropriate ways.
Yeah, and it sounds like obviously it's going to be important that they have their priorities ordered correctly as well.
Exactly.
Good. Okay.
Exactly.
So when you think about the legacy of a Christian athletic,
and let me,
go ahead.
I will give one shout out.
Okay.
Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, if you're ever listening to this, two of the best team parents I've ever had, and they know who they are if they're listening.
What made them some of the best?
They supported in just the ways I talked about, and their son, their oldest son, who became one of my greatest players I ever had, Shannon Martinez. He sat the bench his freshman year, and he was a great talent, but he needed to learn certain aspects of our system and learning defense and all that, and learning to defend, learning how to work harder, the things we wanted to see out of him. And he had two really good point guards ahead of him who were seniors. And we just kept trying to tell him, look, Shannon, you got to bide your time. Well, he was frustrated. And he'll tell you, he almost even transferred after that year because he was frustrated. But it was his mom and dad that kept telling him, no, you're right where you're supposed to be. God has you there for a reason. He's teaching you something right now. They supported me. They understood what we were trying to achieve. Mr. Martinez came and talked to me one time. We had a great conversation about what we needed to see more out of Shannon. He goes, Coach, I appreciate you meeting with me, and I get it. You have my support. I'm going to be a voice in his ear and helping to make sure that he understands and sticks this thing out. And they were great. They were always positive with our team, even though it came to every game, even though their son wasn't playing much that first year. Supported in other ways as well, financially, and bringing food for the team and things like that, just little things. But Shannon became an All-American player for us, junior and senior year. And it's just great to see that journey. And his senior day, just the emotion of that, mom and dad out there together. I'm almost kind of getting emotional now thinking of them because that has been a beautiful relationship. Even 20 years later, Shannon is now a wonderful husband and father and a Christian young man leading his family. Those parents are still wonderful people. We've stayed in touch all these years. They cheer Trinity on, even though they didn't go to Trinity. They went to another school that I was
Yeah.
coaching at the time. You know,
What
so
a what an awesome story, and such a cool example of how being willing to kind of trust the process, right, can bring about these great results, even when it's painful. It can be when you're in it.
exactly.
That's great. And I think that that's actually a great segue into the next question, which is when you think about the legacy that you want your program to leave as a Christian athletic program, what do you hope it looks like? What is that legacy like?
Well, I hope ultimately that we honored the Lord in how we competed, that we showed respect for the game, for the process, for our opponents, and how we competed, that we represented our institution well, and in the right kind of a prideful way, not a negative pride, but a good pride. But ultimately, Psalm 115:1, not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name be the glory. That's been a foundational verse this year, a verse that we chose at the beginning of this year for Trinity Baptist College athletics. The Latin expression of that is non nobis domine, which became a famous song, which we now play at the end of our games. When a game finishes, it'll come in over the speaker system. We've had people go, "What is that?" And it's a very formal sounding, almost Gregorian chant. It's not long, maybe 20 seconds long, but it's beautiful, and it's a beautiful expression. And that's what we want. We want people to ask the question, "What is that?" And then we can say, that's a prayer, Psalm 115:1 in Latin. Not to us, O Lord, but to your name be the glory. Whether we win or lose, we want that to be our prayer. And we always invite the opponent to pray with us. That's a part of the DNA of the NCCAA, the National Christian College Athletic Association, which is the organization we compete with, that all of our NCCAA teams pray together after the competition, win or lose. But even for our non-NCCAA opponents, we always invite them before the game. We always want to do it prior to, so that, especially if we end up winning, we don't want it to be viewed as, of course you want to pray with us. You just won the game. No, that's why we always tell our coaches, make sure we ask beforehand, and we tell them, Coach, win or lose after the game, we'd love to invite you to just have a quick prayer with us afterwards. And so ultimately that's our goal. And that we served, I guess, our members well, the members of our programs well, and that we hopefully inculcated some of these ideas into their lives, so that 20, 30 years down the road, we can look back and say, wow, we did our job well. Look at, it's not about the championships, or how many wins did you have on the scoreboard or whatever else. It's about, how's Shana Martinez doing? How's Zach Shank doing? How's, these great players that came through our program and that we tried to pour into an influence for God and for the gospel, and try to give them a foundation for living life well in a way that pleases the Lord. How are they doing? And, that to me is the ultimate scoreboard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, those are just a couple of many, many names that you could share about people whose lives have been transformed through the program here at Trinity and other programs that you've been a part of or worked with. Well, Coach Jones, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I have learned a lot personally, and it's definitely helped me to renew my mind on some of these principles that we've discussed. So
Sure.
I thank you for being here. And to all of those who are listening, I appreciate you sitting with us for this period.
Well, grateful for the invitation, and it was an honor to be with you, and I enjoyed the discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you.